I'm Tom Davies, and this is Collecting Stories, American Art. Artists enjoy painting scenes of people enjoying themselves. Why not? They're happy paintings, everybody enjoys them. This segment explores many ways to pursue recreation, relaxation, and rest. Certainly, the beach is a major one. Abraham Walkowicz escaped the Tsar's army, settling into the Jewish ghetto of the Lower East Side. This work reflects that he knew firsthand how important Coney Island was as a retreat for New Yorkers to escape the sweltering heat. Artists enjoy painting images of people enjoying themselves. The scenes may be loud, boisterous, and packed with people, or relaxed, quiet, and enjoying a moment of privacy. Both of these images are illustrations by the prominent artist-illustrator Walter Granville Smith. At the time the artist was working, the late 1890s, well into the 1930s, there was still a separation in the view of many, placing fine artists on a higher, more noble footing than illustration. Artists like Smith successfully bridged that gap and was a rare example of a painter who excelled at both. His pure illustrations were in constant demand and appeared in the major magazines of the early 20th century, and his easel paintings, or fine arts, were exhibited nationally in all the major venues of the day. Working in New York City, Smith would spend 10 months meeting unrelenting deadlines for his illustrations, and then retreat to Long Island for 2 months, where he executed his major Impressionist easel paintings. This drama-filled scene portrays a group of folks intending to have a good time frolicking in the surf, but it's rougher than anticipated, and there's a little sense of panic brewing. A careful study of this major work reveals that the illustrator in Smith just could not resist implying a narrative or story in his depiction of the woman in the center as she struggles to maintain her composure. Smith does accurately portray a time when many beachgoers were not very good swimmers, and it was common to see these lifelines extending from the beach out into the surf attached to a mooring pole offshore. Having owned this significant work since 1980, I never saw anything like it until researching this piece and unearthed this similar painting, size and whereabouts unknown. These figures seem to be slightly more comfortable in their situation. Walter Granville Smith succeeded at being a major artist in both camps, fine arts and illustration. This sun-filled beach scene is by a relatively unknown artist named Edwin Gunn. I saw it in a New York gallery and immediately knew the location, Front Beach, Rockport, Massachusetts. I knew nothing about the artist, and virtually nothing appeared in the standard research books at the time. But I had a strong interest in Cape Ann art and felt it was exceptionally well painted. In fact, it prompted the frequently asked question, nobody can paint this well and have done only one. Where are all the rest? I later exhibited this piece in a Rockport Art Association show, acknowledged I knew nothing about the artist, and hoped, well, maybe somebody might respond. I received a wonderful letter from a local artist named William Beale. This is the interesting part. He said the Gunn family was close friends with his father, the artist Gifford Beale, and together the families used to summer in Port Clyde, Maine. One summer, Edwin Gunn had a 2-man show in the rather small Port Clyde Library, along with a younger artist showing his work for the first time. It was Andrew Wyeth. Now that's interesting. From the depths of Siberia to the forefront of American modernism, describes Abraham Walkowicz. After his father died, while ministering in China to Jewish soldiers conscripted into the Russian army, the Walkowitz's mother immigrated to America with her 4 children, one dying while the family crossed Europe. Arriving in America around 1883, they settled into the Jewish ghetto in the Lower East Side. Abraham, at 5 years old, worked with his family selling newspapers on a corner stand in order to survive. By 1906, he left for France and became fascinated with Cubism, Fauvism, early abstract art, almost anything pointing towards modernism. He became an outspoken proponent of continuous experimentation in art, his definition of modernism. It is believed Walkowicz can lay claim to have had the very first modernist exhibition in 1907 in this country. It caused a sensation, not all of it good. Years later, he said he had to learn to accept criticism, even ridicule. His career as an artist was cut short by glaucoma and severe visual impairment in the 40s. Nevertheless, he lived to witness modernism evolve from a protest avant-garde movement against the establishment to becoming an accepted style and eventually a tradition. I think from what we've looked at thus far, it's pretty clear I'm not a fan of modernism. Yet I found this gutsy beach scene of Coney Island intriguing. At the turn of the century, up through the 40s, Coney Island was the retreat from city dwellers to escape summer's oppressive heat. It's an important spot in New York's history. This piece is not dated, but it has to be early, perhaps circa 1910, given it is about as representational as Walkowicz gets of the more than 800 works appearing at auction. Less than a dozen are as academic or realistic as this, and only one other of Coney Island in this exact style. Nevertheless, his firm commitment to the future and a modern, innovative way to represent it is commendable. Unable to find an image of the artist, Stacy Tolman, I discovered this major work in the Brooklyn Museum entitled The Musicale, in which he portrayed himself as the violinist. Tolman was a central figure in the art circles of Providence, Rhode Island, especially given his role as a teacher at the Rhode Island School of Design. His portraits are in various institutions throughout the state, including Brown University Collection and the State House. His major work, a portrait of the renowned American printmaker, W.H. Bicknell, is in the permanent collection of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. In this deceptively simple beach scene, Tolman uses an intense blue color to establish it is the ocean, but makes no effort to communicate movement or illustrate waves. Instead, the water is a source of enjoyment, peace, and quiet conversation, a clear presence but not intrusive, thus doesn't interfere with the peaceful mood Stacy Tolman has created. The 19th century concept of boating as a family affair is beautifully captured here with a family, quote, boating on the Hudson, as this piece is entitled, dated 1864. Perhaps they're heading for a picnic spot on the opposite bank of the river. As often seen in paintings at this exact time, the bucolic image belies the dark truth of the raging Civil War. Nevertheless, we can imagine a family crossing the Hudson River in the vicinity of Peekskill, where the artist Frank Anderson lived throughout his productive life. Anderson's talent is evident, but his shy, somewhat withdrawn personality helps explain the small number of works he painted. Only 23 pieces have appeared at auction since the 1970s. He was, however, an amateur inventor, especially things involving electricity, and he is credited with making several improvements in the telegraph. At this time, images along the Hudson River were very romantic and suggest how vital the river was to those inhabiting its banks. Sailing has long been among the most popular recreational activities, and one that artists love to paint. From the excitement and grandeur of America's Cup races to a single figure sailing his skiff on some quiet pond, artists are attracted to these images. This dramatic scene along the Connecticut coast, looking out at Long Island Sound, was painted in 1884. The artist, Henry Pember Smith, was born in Waterford, Connecticut, and lived a good part of his career in the Hartford area. With the exception of a few years in Venice, the vast majority of his works were rural farm scenes. Marine images like this are quite rare. Nevertheless, Smith demonstrates his uncanny use of brilliant aqua blues along the crests of the waves, creating a convincing image of ocean sailing. Wayne Morrell was an industrial designer who was mostly self-taught as an artist. He initially lived in Wethersfield, Connecticut, before moving permanently to Cape Ann. Wayne was the first artist I met in 1965. As one who lacks the patience for fly fishing, I don't grasp the serenity I'm told by devotees of the sport that comes from the simple act of casting. I'm sure it's true, and on canvas it looks great. This piece, entitled Lily Pads, is one of the first works I acquired, and was part of a series that Wayne did for the covers of Reader's Digest in 1967. From my initial perspective, I saw in Wayne Morrell an uncomplicated enthusiasm of self-discovery as his work continued to improve over the years. On my drives up to Cape Ann, I would frequently see Wayne standing hip deep in one of the surrounding ponds, painting whatever it was he observed in front of him. A rousing and boisterous party and dance definitely qualifies as recreational activity that artists love to paint. This image is entitled Spanish Costume Ball at the Art Students League and is one of Uruguayan-born F. Louis Mora's masterpieces. This is a smaller version of the same painting. Many of the figures can be identified and are well-known painters of the 20s and 30s. Mora's family emigrated from Montevideo in 1880 when Luis was 6 years old. His father was a well-recognized Catalan sculptor, and he had two cousins who were married into the Bacardi rum dynasty in Cuba. Mora became the most well-known Latin artist during the first half of the 20th century. He worked in all mediums and was a prolific portrait and landscape painter, illustrator, and muralist. His connection with Spain and the great Spanish masters was profound, with frequent visits to Spain and the Prado Museum. Mora lived and taught in many locations throughout the country. He stated his goal as an artist was to adapt the techniques of the great Spanish masters into an American modern painting. Mora's work is found in 34 museums across the country, including the Met. In the theme of enjoying oneself, this piece creates a certain unanswered question. What's next? It definitely does not look like rest and relaxation. Nelson Bourne was something of a trailblazer in the contemporary Western art market. And we looked at another piece of his a bit earlier. His skill with watercolor and rendering cloth and leather chaps and boots is unmatched. His objective is to capture segments, pieces, and suggestions of the working cowboy's life. His skill at depicting fragments of cowboys earned the critic's description, the Boots and Butts School. Often his themes are playful, as in this piece entitled Surrounded, but executed with exceptional skills and insight. In spite of all these words, we're still left with what's next? H. Boylston Dummer was an artist, illustrator, whose earlier career was spent in Provincetown, Cape Cod. He had studied with the several prominent teachers, including George Noyes, whom we've already talked about, and worked as a staff artist for the Boston Post and illustrated many children's books. Fed up with P-Town overcrowding, he departed in 1921 and settled in Rockport, Cape Ann, for the remainder of his life. The gray, bitter winter months provide the fishermen of the North Atlantic time for rest and relaxation. This haunting image reflects the influence of Dummer's P-Town years with the direct, unflinching gaze of the fisherman, proudly displaying his handiwork. The fishing gear surrounding the figure, nets, buoys, etc., add to the authenticity of the scene. Active harbor scenes and colorful fishing vessels are natural attractions for artists. They love to paint them. And yet, it is the fishermen themselves who make all this possible. Often the fishermen are not seen at all, or at best are depicted by the artist as largely decorative features on the docks or decks of the boats, small in size and mere suggestions of themselves. Rarely are the fishermen the hero of the compositions. In this piece, the fisherman is the focus of attention, the centerpiece. What could be more relaxing and restful than this image of an elderly gentleman seated by the fire, reading his newspaper and being watched by his adoring dog? The piece was painted by Platt Powell Ryder in 1871. There's a story behind finding this picture. I was living and working in Sydney, Australia in the late 70s. Compared to America, Australia is a young country with very little 19th, early 20th century art. Nevertheless, I would occasionally poke around the relatively few galleries in Sydney. Proudly displayed in the front window of a gallery was this piece. I recognized the artist and quickly concluded it was the best piece in the whole gallery. The dealer didn't know much, but thought it was desirable, as perhaps a Rembrandt, and he priced it accordingly. This meant much higher than if it had been in a New York City gallery. Well, time to do my homework. I thought, and maybe putting together as much information as I could, including pricing and auction data. Now remember, this was pre-computer days, meaning you couldn't just push a button and be a genius. You had to do some real digging. After gradually wearing down the dealer to reality, we agreed upon a price. I still speculate today how this worked its way halfway around the world, most likely, I would guess, by some sea captain landing in New York and returning back home to Australia. Also, I wonder if this was originally a pair and this was the gentleman's wife. Clearly, it's the same hearth. Its location is unknown. This early genre and portrait painter was a respected and active member of the New York art establishment, a member of the National Academy, and founder of the Brooklyn Academy of Design in 1866. His work is rare, and this example is as good as any I've seen over the years. It's appropriate, since our talks are about art, that here we see, tucked away near the corner of a building, the artist at his easel. One can't tell if he's an enthusiastic amateur pursuing his hobby or the professional earning his living. The rewards may approach more rest and relaxation for the amateur than for the professional. Yet, I've heard many professionals confess, despite its precarious nature at times, there's nothing else they'd rather be doing than painting. So, there are definitely rewards to being an artist. Antonio Serino was a man of many talents: artist, teacher, juror, writer, and jewelry designer. Well educated, he was a graduate of the Rhode Island School of Design and Columbia University, and later became an instructor at the Rhode Island School of Design for many years. Sereno split his time between Providence and Rockport. He was one of the founders of the Rockport Art Association in 1921. He was focused, dedicated, and prolific. He knew his subject matter very well. At his passing at 94 years old, he left half of his estate to the Rockport Art Association and half to the Salmagundi Club in New York. Even cowboys get a rest from time to time. In a rare interview, this artist was quoted, "My name is Oleg Stavrowski, born in Harlem in 1927. I have read and heard. I am dead. I am black. I'm from the old country. I don't speak English, and that I'm sometimes difficult to get along with." Of course, none of it's true, except perhaps the last one. Few other artists provided more memorable, funny, and even shocking quotes than premier Western artist Oleg Stavrowski. After his time in the Air Force and his art studies, he honed his skills as an illustrator. In 1959, he visited an exhibition at the Cowboy Hall of Fame in Oklahoma and decided right there on the spot exactly what he wanted to do with his life. He moved to Santa Fe and within a year was invited to exhibit at the same Hall of Fame venue. Basically shunning interviews, once cornered by a critic who asked of his experience with cowboys, his reply, "There are no cowboys in Harlem." Stavrowski learned by observation and study. Most of his work was by commission, and he only accepted requests for Western themes. When a prospective client asked him to paint his children, his reply was, "I have 8 kids of my own, and I don't want to see any more." He denied the request. Finally, in 1996, after repeated requests by the press to do an article, he agreed. As an insight to his irreverent sense of humor, he entitled the article, "The 10 Artists I Steal From." His observations were actually profound. One he described as the Dick Butkus of artists, saying, "I steal the courage to wade in with both hands." Another artist, he feels, defines his personality in his art. "It makes me want to put more Oleg into an Oleg painting." A third, he describes his genius is what he doesn't put into his paintings. It's what he leaves out that helps me know when to stop. Of Stavrowski's favorite Western artists, he says simply, "What do I steal? Everything within the 4 corners of the canvas." Of course, none of this detracts from his skill as a master of color, light and shadow, and composition. This example of 2 working cowboys at rest uses a favorite device of the artist to inject stunning color into his work, the bright yellow rain slickers. A further insight into Oleg Stavrowski's sense of humor is this astounding 6-foot-long painting entitled simply Jiggers. I don't need to add anything. This piece says it all. Our next segment, we pay credit to Frankie Valli. The 4 Seasons. You're just too good to be true. Can't take my eyes off of you.